So welcome everybody to this panel discussion. Our title is going to be discussing young climate activists, why climate education and civic skill building are key to climate justice and equity. My name is Derek and I'll be the moderator for this panel discussion. I work with earthday.org as the Regional Director Africa. So today I'm joined by very inspiring young activists. They're really inspirational. You'll tell from their conversation. And from the start, I'll just say we have Guria Pina, who's the Secretary General of Hague, International Model, United Nations, Qatar. We have Alexandria, who's the founder of Uprising International. And then we have Johnny Dabrowski, who's the co-founder of the climate education team, Fridays for Future. So welcome to this panel. Just before I give each one of you a minute, to say yourselves, I'll just set the stage for this conversation. We know climate literacy is key to solving climate change. We've been calling on governments to commit to taking bold action on climate and environmental literacy. But there has been a very long decade failure to provide quality and meaningful climate and environmental education and civic skills to primary schools. For those, like in Africa, we have primary schools and secondary school. We haven't seen the quality education that they deserve. But also it has been independent efforts to teach citizens the civic skills that they need to fully participate. So we don't know, is it about the fear? Is there a fear that if we empower the citizens with this kind of knowledge and ability, then they will become a problem to our leaders? So it's what we are here to discuss, and we want to see how can we leverage this citizen participation, but also we want to raise a community of citizens who know about the issues that are happening in their communities, but also who can do something about it. So this is what we're here to discuss today. So I'll give each one of you a minute. I think I'll start with Pina.
Okay, hello everyone. So as you introduced me, I'm Julia. I am the head of Thyman Qatar, and I also run my own Model United Nations program within my own school. I'm 17 years old and I study in Doha, Qatar, but I'm Italian. And so we in Qatar use Model United Nations as a platform to express our anger and our voice. Unfortunately, we don't especially have the right to protest, but this is our way to express ourselves and to make sure that our voices are heard on all the issues, not just climate issues. And so I'm really pleased to be here with you all. And yeah, I hope this panel goes great and we get loads out of this discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with an amazing group of young people. My name is Alexandra B Senor. I'm a 16-year-old climate activist and the founder of Uprising International. And so Earth Uprising focuses on climate education, but from a peer-to-peer lens. And the reason why we were inspired to do that was because after organizing for the climate strike movement and seeing how young people were inspired by each other, I noticed just how much young people were educated so much more by their peers. So we focus on peer-to-peer climate education to empower young people to take direct action.
Thank you. Johnny?
And I'm Johnny Dabrowski from Poland. I'm from Fridays for Future, but I work internationally. I'm co-founder of Fridays for Future climate education team, which consists of Fridays for Future activists from around Europe who focus directly on climate education. And our aim is to lobby our governments to implement climate education into our countries. Complex climate education inserted into many subjects. So we came here to encourage world leaders to introduce climate education to their curricula because, as previously said, we really do believe it is one of the keys to solve the problem we're all in, which is climate change. And we all know that we won't solve any crisis without awareness. So this is why we are here. And to make this forgotten subject of climate education, this forgotten point of the COP agenda, to make it viral, and to finally get it on the agenda of COP26.
Yeah. So Johnny, from that point where you've ended on, you're saying we are here at COP to set an agenda. But then first, give us a look on how things are in your country, and also like what you've been advocating for around there. Like, how are things moving there?
All right. So in my country, we don't have climate education. any country has climate education. But we have strived to encourage our government to implement climate education into the curricula. And last June, we met with our Minister of Education as Fridays for Future Poland, together with other youth groups from Poland. And Minister accepted to introduce climate education to the curricula. And now we are working with the Ministry of Education on implementing climate education to the curricula. And we started with the subject of climate anxiety and how to face and how to cope with climate anxiety at schools. So this is the first thing we took care about. And from the executive point of view, there was a team of youth leaders which are working with the government. It was formed, and now this team is working with the government on introducing climate education together with scientists. I do hope it goes well. We will see. Time will see. But we once got there, and we won't stop, and we will get climate education in Poland. I hope as fast as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Johnny. I think Alexandra can also react on it. Johnny is really pushing to see that it's in Poland as well. So, what's your take on the same?
Yeah, so growing up, I never really learned climate education, and I grew up in Northern California, and the most that I ever learned in school was reduce, reuse, recycle. And that's a very common theme in the United States. A lot of people don't really learn that much about climate change, except the very basics. And that is not enough. We need so much more climate education out there. And so there's only one place that has mandatory climate education, which is Italy. And we need to follow Italy in that. I think the United States, we have to focus on getting more climate education there, but also all around the world. And we also need to focus on climate education that doesn't just follow the basic effects of the greenhouse effect, but then also going much further into that. I think we need to start teaching young people about climate versus environmental science, teaching them about intersectionality and historical movements that brought change. And that's what Earth Uprising really focuses on too, is teaching all of those different aspects of it. So kind of like climate education 2.0. And so we really want to make sure that we reach so many young people. And there's a lot of teachers who are interested in teaching young people, but sometimes they just don't have the curriculums, and sometimes they just don't know what to be teaching young people. And so focusing on reaching out to people, to teachers, to school districts, to get them the information that they need so that they can also take it into their own hands. Because right now, where I'm from, we can't wait for climate education to become mandatory, because to get it mandatory in curriculums could take years. So that's why we have to take it into our own hands and educate each other ourselves.
Thanks. Pina, do you think, I think I will also pose the same to you. I want to understand the current look of things from your perspective and why you've seen in your country and also the work you've been doing. What do you think also needs to be done? I think, after giving the way things are in your country, I think you can go ahead and also add on to what do you think needs to be done, and also what do you think about why we are failing? Because I think we all agree at some point that there is no clear plan from countries about climate literacy, and literally it's never said anywhere. If you looked at the NDCs, why do you think we are failing? But also can react on
Well,
that.
yeah, absolutely. The situation in Qatar is very similar to the ones that Johnny and Alexandra described. We also don't have any formal education on the climate issues, and that's why we work within Model United Nations and in all the student-led organizations in our community. We really push from students for students, and so we ensure that the action and the education comes from us, and so all of our projects are centered around this. Yeah, and as you said, so the issue is that our governments do not listen to us, and as Johnny said, we are also working towards writing our own curriculums, and I think this is key. I think that I was on a panel yesterday actually, and one of the panelists said that we should treat education as a living, breathing thing, and I think this is so important, and I would add to this that this should be done by youth, so we should have an active role in crafting our own educational curriculums and in telling the people in charge what we want to see in our education in our schools. And so, yeah, this is what I think youth should be doing. We should be banding together and ensuring that we work together to focus on the local impacts of climate issues to form our curriculums and then take this into global action. So, yeah, local to global is really key.
Okay, I think local to global is going to be key, and I think Alexandra also bring you on this as well. I think we all agree governments are failing. Like they literally have no clear plan. But on like I will take your take on that as well. What do you think governments are failing to make this that we think it's something that decides our future? Because every young child when they're growing up, they need to have knowledge as they're growing up. They need to have skills given to them and their ability as well to make sure that they can do amazing things. Like you have seen young people do a lot of nice, good innovations. They're out there getting awards. They're very celebrated. They're really inspiring their communities. But why do you think governments are not taking this really serious and they're still failing?
Yeah, well, actually, I was talking with someone the other day about the Arctic, actually, and education around the Arctic, because I'm here with the Arctic Angels as my delegation for the first week. And so I was talking with people, and they were saying that really we should be educating world leaders because on some of these issues around climate change, we as civil society know more about climate change than some of our world leaders do. And so I think that there needs to be more education of those in power. But then I also think that it's important that we start educating because in school we're basically being taught up how to live in the same society that we've always lived in, how to be good consumers, how to continue on the same path that we've always continued. And so it's almost like we've been lied to. And by our world leaders not doing anything and by not educating us and implementing ways for young people to know what's happening, they're in a way setting us up for a future of failure because we are just being taught the same things. And in the future, those things of the way that our society works won't be possible with climate change. And that's why we have to educate people on adaptation too, because we're already seeing the effects of the climate crisis, but we also have to focus on adaptation going into the future. And so our world leaders have definitely failed in the action that they're in teaching us, and then also they're setting us up for a future right now that isn't going to be what young people want to see. And so that's why we have to really take it into our own hands.
Thank you. I think I can pass on to Johnny. I think you will agree with me. You have been following the negotiations with the SCE, and literally there is still nothing as of today that is coming out from there. And why do you think this keeps going on each and every year? Because every year there is COP, and they will give us the same promises. They will promise things they have not done. They're even not implementing or even setting the funding. So why do you think they're still failing to make all these things possible?
Well, from my point of view, if I were a politician, I don't really know why they're not introducing climate education to the curricula. It doesn't cost so much money, like it's not closing a coal mine. And it's not a hard thing to do, it doesn't take a lot of time. So I look at this way, that climate education is education where you've got the same goal. So it's uniting people. What I feel is that governments, most of the governments, want to divide us. So this is the first thing, that maybe they are scared of climate education. There's a fear of it because it will unite people, and by people I mean also nations that are divided. That would unite regions, because we all know that fight for climate is beyond division, or it should be. The second point is election. We all know they think in 4 years, perspective. And if we educate people and we educate them in context of climate change and coping with it, well, people are intelligent if you educate them. So they will naturally see which politicians are more progressive in context of climate change and which are not. So climate education is like it also affects political choices, of course, and I think this is what politicians worry about. But we've got a world to save. If you don't want to do it, just get out of here. Don't be a politician. Don't be our leader. We've got a goal for the century. Our generation has it, and well, we need to do it anyway. And I think that just not introducing climate education to the curricula is stopping the progress. It's making the pace of energy transformation lower. So I think that if you're ignorant towards climate literacy, climate education in schools, I think that is a crime, because you are not letting people be aware about what is their future, about where they're going. It's like sending a soldier to war without a weapon, you know?
Yeah, so I will start from there again from you, Johnny. So we know where they're supposed to take the action, they have not done it. For example, if you look at the NDCs that countries submitted, there was literally nothing. There is nothing. Everyone can check. There is literally nothing that countries have put there as a commitment or something they really want to achieve as well. But also, if you go deep into countries and you ask the concerned people that, hey, what's happening? You're not putting all these things. You're not setting up the pace for this. Is it what you're not interested in educating us as young people? But also, is it that you do not have the financing? Is it that you don't just want to do it? At times, they don't give us answers to it. At times, I also feel like maybe they don't know what they're supposed to do. So, as very young, inspiring leaders, it's time maybe you start giving us solutions about what you think can be done. And I'll start with you, Johnny. What do you think would be the most viable thing you would want to see happen, and something to happen now, because the action we're asking for is now. We can't wait for another COP to put our asks as young people. All we're asking for is now. So what do you think countries can now do so that they do not have anything? I know you're pushing a declaration as well. And I also give you 2 minutes or 3 minutes to share what this declaration looks like and why is it important, So just give us everything you know about the declaration.
All right, so I'll combine those two questions with one answer, because Fridays for Future, together with ACE Yango Working Group, we're making a climate education conference on Monday at 1 p.m. in the main hall next to the Climate Education Gallery, which UNICEF created. And one of the documents that will be proposed on this conference is a document that was started by Fridays for Future Climate Education, which is a declaration on climate education. It is a document for the governments, which specifically explains how climate education should look like. So first of all, climate education should be in many subjects. It should be part of subjects, not as one separate subject. Second thing is that schools need to have tools to cope with climate anxiety. Third point is that teachers need to be trained. Because, of course, there are many teachers who inspire us to fight with climate change, but can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right, because I can't hear myself. All right. The third point is that most teachers I know, they're not prepared to teach about climate. Not only what to teach, but also how to teach, not to cause additional climate anxiety, right? The next point is not only teaching about climate, but giving example. So we would like every schools, which are buildings, to be climate neutral. And we would like it to have it by 2030, and all newly built schools to be climate neutral when they are built already. Our next point is to have a platform for climate education online, an international platform best case scenario created by IPCC with cooperation with governments, so that teachers, students, and also adults, they have a source of knowledge. If they don't have books, if they can afford them, they have a free source of knowledge online. So basically, this is our idea for climate education. So summarizing, climate education not as one subject, but as part of many subjects to make it interdisciplinary, because climate change is interdisciplinary. Second point is to teach the teachers how they should teach us, because from the conversations yesterday which we had with the teachers unions, even the teachers' unions say, we don't know how to. So we need preparation to, to also inspire to be responsible, to inspire about values. This is not only knowledge about facts. For me, climate education should be mostly about values, because values are those attitudes that survive. Facts may diminish, but values stay. And I think that values and knowing why we do it, why we have a change right now, this is the core. This should be the core of climate education, because this is the way you get and involve society. So, in summary, we have planned for climate education. Of course, climate education should be adequately introduced in every nation, because education systems are different. But I think that the main goal of climate education, which is to just not only inspire, but to finally have an engaged society which, besides different attitudes, has one goal, which is, well, basically to get our planet net zero by 2050. And this is what I consider the goal of climate education, and also what we'll present on Monday.
Yeah, Alexandria, I think I also bring you on this. AFDA has been pushing a petition out, so we have like millions of signatories to our petition, and these are voices of people in community, because we didn't force them to sign on to this petition, and all of them agree with us. Like, this is what we need. Like, climate literacy should not be something of the past. This is something of the present. And if we are to rapidly solve all these crises that we have, and the loss and damage that is happening, I was just seeing a video a couple of hours ago where in Karamoja, it's deep in northern Uganda, a farmer lost the cows through a flood, and then they literally don't know what to do, and they even don't know. I think they might be seeing what's happening, but they might not be knowing how to stop it. So, like, from your activism, the work you've been doing, how do you think young people can come into, try to pressure their governments, maybe trying to make sure governments are working to make sure climate literacy is, because I've seen you like push most of these agendas and have worked. You continuously trying to make sure that we're on track to net zero, maybe, or solutions are there in communities. So, from your work, like, what can we do as young people? Show us how. I know that young people watching online, watching you, and they're ready to hear your answers about this. Like, what can they do to make sure that governments really do what they're supposed to do?
Well, I think that there's so many different ways that people can make their voices heard. And I think that especially it's important that young people are, first of all, in the conversation. And so it's important that young people actually have a presence at COP, because A, we're going to be the most affected generation by the climate crisis. Every aspect of our lives, from where we live, from where we go to school, a lot of young people are having conversations about whether or not they want to have children. And that's because of climate change. And so it's important that they are having a conversation and they're in these decision-making rooms. So that way they can tell world leaders and those in power what they want to see. And a lot of young people, we want to see climate education. And so when we have these conversations with world leaders to their face, it's a way to tell them, well, this is exactly what we want. But then again, if they don't do that, then we can just pressure them from outside. And so even today, there's a protest happening outside. Two of our panelists are coming from that protest right now. And there's 100,000 young people out there protesting here in Glasgow to hold our world leaders accountable and make them take action. And so protesting is one of the best ways to make your voices heard outside of the system. And so I think that we need action from every area we can, whether you're in these rooms or whether you're outside. Both are very impactful and both are very needed.
I also bring, on this, I'm sure that young people who are really interested to know what they can do. Because at times, I used to be that young person who had so many ideas, but whenever you could go to these ministers and tell them, there are things we have, these are asks as young people, they just leave the documents for you. I think you've all gone through where leaders don't even want to listen. They'll just leave a quote in the office and leave. So what do you think there's that young person watching you, and even there are so many young people here, or even actors or development partners that might be thinking, how can they be engaged in this kind of struggle to see that countries can really make this mandatory, can make it assessed, can make it accessible to everyone in their communities?
Well, first of all, I'd like to come back to something that Johnny said about ending the cycle of empty promises. This is, at the end of the day, what youth want. And the documents that we are drafting, the things that we are putting out there are already there. The manifestos have been created by youth and are out there. The problem is that they're hearing us but not acknowledging us. And so to empower youth, I think that we need to band together and form groups, as we are already doing, but continue to put pressure on government so that they listen to us. At the end of the day, we are such a powerful group, and if we stick together, we do a magnifying effect. So essentially, a magnifying glass and the sun, we are focusing the light, we are centering the action, and we are starting a fire on climate action, and we are ensuring that governments listen to us and act. And so I think the most powerful thing we can do is to stick together, to continue to do what we have been doing. And the marches and everything that we take part in, everything that is student-led and student-run, is essential in putting the pressure on governments and ensuring that our voices are heard and that action is taken so that our generation won't have to deal with the effects that you've been talking about, that our homes and our countries will be safe, and that this issue will be resolved in time.
Let's talk about the opportunities. Because I want to imagine they're going to do it because they have failed before. But I want to imagine they are going to do it because they're hearing the young people voices. But if they are to do it, or if they do it now, like we're asking them to do it, what are the opportunities you think young people will benefit if if climate literacy is made available to them, if environmental education has really made accessible. But also there are gaps like information, like access to information, because literally like there are young people out there where even access to data is really expensive, access to information is expensive. So like what do you think are the opportunities if we make this a reality? Because that's what we are all working to achieve. If we make it, what are the opportunities out there?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, we are living in a sea of disinformation at the moment. And so focusing climate education in curriculums and in formal education is central. And this ensures that more people are in the same position as us right now. So we are the lucky few that are able to voice our opinions and voice our ideas, but there is so much more volume and so many more ideas. And I think that if you just speak to a couple of young activists, they will come up with initiatives and things that no one else has come up with before, that world leaders will open their mouth at in surprise, because we have so many ideas that just aren't shared and we don't have the platform to do so. And so by ensuring that we're educated, we understand the issue, we can take this further and provide the solutions that are much needed in the world right now.
Alexandria as well.
Yeah, I kind of want to bring a different point to this. So who here has a climate story? Do any of you have a climate story? I have one. I feel like all of us have one, whether you know it or not. And so my climate story is I was in my hometown in Northern California in 2018 when the Camp Fire happened in Paradise, California. And at the time, that was the worst wildfire in California's history and the most destructive one. And so I lived so close to it that it ended up blanketing the entire area in this thick, unbreathable smoke. I had to roll up wet towels, put them under windows and doors to keep the smoke from coming in. And of course, since then, California has seen our first ever gigafire, and more fires have surpassed that destruction that happened. But at the time, that was a very scary experience because I have asthma and I didn't really know what was happening or why California was on fire so much more. And I started to research and I started to see the connection between California's wildfires and climate change. And the thing is there are so many people out there who have a climate story like that, who are being impacted by the climate crisis, but they don't necessarily know that it's climate change. And that's another reason why climate education is so important, is that young people can see what's happening in their community and connect it to climate change. And then once you are educated and you see that connection, then you can go out there and decide what sort of actions you want to do, because young people, it's important that we have community and grassroots activists in the conversation, because they're the ones who know what solutions their communities need. And that's why it's important that they're here at these conferences too. And so education, when you're educating young people, it it empowers them. They have the solutions like you were talking about. They know what actions they want to see. And so educating young people is one of the best ways to get solutions to the climate crisis. So it's all interconnected. Once you see what's happening in your community, you're educated on it, you're empowered, and you know what's happening with the science, then you're out there and you're taking action and you know the solutions.
Johnny, you can also come on this as well.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to go back to the point which you mentioned, that youth is making a lot of propositions. They are bringing a lot of solutions. Not only our declaration on climate education, but this year there were at least global youth declarations. For example, Youth for Climate Declaration from Youth for Climate Conference in Milan. Today, Global Youth Statement from COI, from Conference of Youth held by Youngo, was presented to the First Minister of Scotland, to President of COP. So my point is that absolutely youth has, I think I can say it for 100%, that we've got better ideas than the politicians have. But what I wanted to say is that these ideas are brought by 8% of youth. I don't know how much of my generation are climate activists, but what I mean is that to bring world to net zero by 2050, even 1% is not enough. We need everybody involved, simply saying. That is why we need climate education, because yes, there are a lot of leaders between us, and this is what we need, this is what our planet needs for transformation. Leaders, not one, not couple, but thousands of leaders. But we need more, and we need more people engaged, because there's never been such a goal in the history of the civilization, like getting like a total transformation in 50 years. Well, 30, right? So this is my point. So I absolutely agree that there are leaders, there are groups which bring professional documents to the agenda, also on this conference. Global Youth Statement, for example, which I've mentioned. But what I mean is that not we need more documents like this. No, what we need is these documents be implemented. This is what we need. But I really lose hope in this, that they will be implemented by our politicians. So my point is that we need to have an educated society, so that when in few years we come to power, and then the generations behind us, there will be no objective about it if we make it happen or not. We'll just turn these documents, these proposals, these solutions into reality. That we will make this energy transformation, but towards that, we cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. We cannot condemn. So if we condemn the mistakes of the past, we'll repeat them. And this is the goal of climate education, not to repeat them, basically.
Yeah, we don't want to repeat the same mistakes we have made in the past. And I think, there are still issues of intergenerational equity. You find that young people are pushing such agendas, maybe on climate literacy and environmental education, but they're not heard. And before I bring in the audience to share your experience, on how the state of climate education is in your countries, I just want to have another quick go through. Then we can invite the audience in this. Could this kind of crisis on education, of course, it has been hit by the pandemic as well. But could you think the challenge could be because we don't have priority on climate education and and environmental education as well? Is it that countries do not have priority? Is that they do not see the benefits? Is that they do not know? Because I'm sure even leaders who have also been part of education systems, that have reached there because they went through education systems that try to do, educate them, give them the skills. But maybe why they're not acting is because no one taught them about, the climate crisis or the other issues on how we can end them. So is it an issue of priority? I'll start with you.
I think it definitely is. I think you reach the point where you become a minister and you forget you were ever a child and you were ever in the education system. And so you forget to prioritize the people that are the youth now and the people who need to be educated, unlike you were when you were in education. And so, yes, I absolutely think it's an issue of priority. I think it would be stressed even more if we had a seat at the table, if we had advisory panels in every country, not just a couple, but in every single one. If we had a voice at the table, this wouldn't be an issue. We would be able to prioritize it ourselves, even if ministers didn't.
Alexandria as well.
I definitely think it's a lack of priority. I think that there's so much that needs to be done, and I think that education sometimes falls to the very bottom of the list, even though it's one of the most important things. And actually, one thing that I've never really understood is sometimes for climate education in the US, you have to go major in it in college. You don't learn it in high school and elementary school and middle school. You have to go actually study it to learn about the environment, which I've always thought is so interesting because we should all be learning about the environment and about climate change. And so I think that it's a responsibility of governments to be the ones who bring this to us, because climate education and what's happening to the environment is the most important thing, because the environment is what nurtures us, and we're supposed to be good stewards of the environment too. And so if we're not teaching others about what's happening, then we're not being very good stewards if we're ignoring the issue and not being taught it.
Johnny as well.
Well, I agree. What could I add?
Okay. The kind of education we're asking, it's not just education like sitting in school. This is civic education, whereby we need to give citizens an opportunity to be able to, challenge the kind of inaction that has been there. But at times also see that their voices are heard, and also we have so many green jobs as well. Because countries are talking about green economy, transition into, clean energy and stuff. But there are individuals in our communities, in our rural communities, who have never stepped in school. Like, they've never been in a classroom. They've never seen a blackboard. But also still have issues where a girl child, they're still not given an opportunity to also go for school. From where I come from in Africa, these are the issues that are even stopping young people to even access the basic education you could have. So it remains that we are not just asking for education. Because education, some countries have, some areas have. We're asking for civic education. This is where I'm going to bring in the audience, because the panelists were discussing, what they need to see happen, the issues in their community, and I'm going to give each one of you an opportunity to also tell us what's happening in your community, the status of climate education and environment education, but also what you think can be done. So you can just put up your hand, then the microphone will come to you. Anyone who feels like sharing? Or you can ask a question to any of the panelists as well. Yeah, so we have 1, 2, 3. So we can start with him.
I had my question, I just wrote it down. So, John, I remember you were talking about how climate education should be introduced in every classroom and in every curriculum. So you asked for teaching teachers how to teach it, creating carbon neutral school facilities, and creating online platforms for climate education. And I quoted you here, adequately introduced in every nation. So what about the nations and the places where it's harder to introduce, where funding is harder to receive for this? The Minister of Climate in Kenya was just here talking about how sometimes it's difficult to gather these fundings for these programs when there are more necessary things in the country going on. So how do you think that climate education falls on the ladder of importance? And then how do you think that these less economically developed countries can afford climate education?
Okay, I think we shall take, David, we shall take a round of 3, then we shall come back to the audience. Yes?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. My question is not so far from his. I think the effect of climate change, like you've all articulated, it seems to be affecting more the younger generation and the children because they are yet to live longer. Alexander, you talked about the question of priority. Somehow I tend to think it may not be a priority for our leaders now because they have already lived. They have other priority. So it's a priority for our generation. And since it's a priority, I'm very much impressed with what you're already doing. But the question of the indigenous community, the less privileged, like you talked about. I come from a very small village in northern Uganda, but now here I'm representing an international Catholic youth organization. How can we reach these indigenous people? How can we pass this message of climate change? Very few months ago, I was back home and I was speaking to my primary school teacher about climate change. He didn't really have any idea about all this kind of thing, but it's just saying there is no more rain during the rainy season, there is sun during the sunny season, there is rain, but he cannot explain. If that primary school teacher cannot explain that, how can they explain this to the students if it is included in our curriculum? So maybe the question is now, how can the teachers in the most local kind of community also be reached to pass this whole idea about climate change? Thank you.
Thank you. We had the last hand behind. Please, if you could say your name and organization, that will be very, very important to us as well.
Hello. Oh, hey, I'm Krista Poppleton. I'm with Climate Generation, a NGO in Minnesota in the U.S. And there's just so many things I had in my head. But I guess one question I would have is, when we were talking about the need for education, that being the source there, I'm wondering if you all have been working at all with talking with the folks working also on loss and damage or climate financing. Because what we know is when we've got education aligned with those things, or ACE, with Action for Climate Empowerment, which is actually where it shows up in the UN, Article 6, Article 12, that is actually what's going to accelerate that kind of Article 6, loss and damage, 1.5, the stuff we're working on here. So I don't know if you've been in the room with any of those or thought about aligning with that, but they need youth in there doing that. So.
Thank you. So I think there was a question for you, Alexandria, and then there was a question for Johnny. But also, I want to introduce Aisha, who's the co-founder of Polluters Out. She has been busy today, so I'll give you the opportunity after they've answered the questions. Then, okay.
So to answer your question, Earth Uprising, we focus on peer-to-peer climate education. So we're kind of going around the entire system. And so I think that one of the reasons why peer-to-peer education is so important is because it's more accessible. If you have the resources and the information out there, then more communities can be able to take this information and just educate each other. And then when it comes to indigenous communities, I think that there's a lot more that we can learn from them than we can teach them. And so I think that we should be listening more to indigenous people and what they have to say about climate change than us going into their communities with the information. And especially in California, one of the things with wildfires, a solution there is actually going back to indigenous practices when it comes to controlled fire burns. And right now, California does not have that great forest management and infrastructure, outdated infrastructure. And so indigenous wisdom is one of the best solutions that we have.
Yes, Jean, you also had a question directed to you?
Yeah, so this question is very true, that I personally look from the European perspective, where climate education is not a big cost, but we know that for many countries, especially MAPA countries, it is a big cost. So, it's all about money here. And I wouldn't count for governments of the global north to fund climate education, because even if they can't fund vaccines for the MAPA countries, they won't fund you climate education. So, well, the source I will look for is the private sector of the global north. The big companies, maybe the big tech companies, which maybe even if they use it as greenwashing, they can bring you climate education, to be absolutely honest with you. Of course, there could be also informal education in MAPA countries, which maybe doesn't require such big sources of money, but what we need is formal education. And yes, we need money for it. And where I would search for it, as I've said, is the private sector of the global north. And to be honest, I'm wondering if personally not to take care of it in the future, because I'm on the 8 sessions, as one of you mentioned. And I'm just so disappointed after I leave the room because, like, it's no difference if they have this session or not. Basically, nothing comes out of it. It's just on paper, to have it on paper that they've done something, and it's just a waste of their time because they're not doing anything. So, in funding for climate education, I would really search for the private sector and not ask the governments.
All right. We shall now bring in Aisha. If you would, if you could introduce yourself, and then you can tell us the status of climate education and environmental education in the
Yeah,
community.
so hi everybody, I'm Aisha. I was late because I was at the youth strike today speaking and also organizing with everybody about climate education. Before I start that, I actually wanted to make a point about the question that was previously asked about indigenous communities not knowing about climate. I think that's actually an assessment that is limited because of our vocabulary and understanding. Nomadic people know there's something up. Their bodies know that there's something up with the planet. They might not be able to articulate it in the languages of carbon dioxide and methane, but people of the earth, right now, those who are born from it, are raised by it, and give back to it, know that there's something wrong. And I think it's quite a patronizing thing to assume that we will go into their communities and teach them about climate from a perspective of precipitation and Arctic ice when their relationship to the land has different vocabulary in communicating it. So the crops are failing, the animals are dying. It is harder in the summer to maintain your house, especially if you have a mud house, because it's so hot. So if we want to approach communities where our languages or our kind of understanding the world is different, we have to do it in a manner that is not only respectful, but has their vocabulary involved. And that's something I wanted to talk about because I've been here for the past 6 days and I hear the word indigenous in everybody's mouth. It keeps coming out again and again. I was at a panel with BBC. One of the representatives for oil companies called herself indigenous. So I think people are constantly using it and doing a disservice to the word and what it means because it's become terminology that is accessible to everybody. And we've taken away from the wisdom and kind of respect we need to come into it. And especially if we're speaking about indigenous communities. In nomadic communities, you can't represent your entire people without getting a blessing of the elders first. So that's just something that I felt like I needed to get out of my system because it's day 6 for me. And it's something that I'm seeing again and again and again, and it's rather frustrating. I'm not indigenous. I'm nomadic to Pakistan. My family lives a few hours underneath the Himalayan mountains. We grew up by the Chenab River. That's our main water source. Pakistan does not have indigenous peoples because the government doesn't recognize them. So you need the government to recognize them before you can even claim it on paper. But it's something that I'm seeing here again and again. I just had to say it.
Yeah, you can go ahead and maybe tell us what's happening in your community in terms of climate literacy.
Sure. So I came to the United States at age 6 and then went back and came again. I'm getting my education in the U.S. There's a few things I would like to share on this panel here with you guys today. 2020 was the hottest year for Pakistan. We are part desert, part forest, part industrialized city. Our desert was the hottest place on planet Earth. It reached 145 degrees Fahrenheit. At 120 degrees Fahrenheit, your body, your internal organs, start collapsing. At 135, you go into complete shock and they start bursting, depleting, because your body can't maintain equilibrium. At 145 degrees, it's hotter outside than inside the mother's womb. So babies, when they come out, they're dying in the houses because it's so hot. The other thing that is occurring in Pakistan is we have a very, very huge energy deficit. We can't afford oil. We can't afford coal. I know in the first world we talk about stepping away from oil. The global south is still trying to catch up in terms of like energy. So we don't have air conditioning when it gets 145 degrees. We don't have fans when it gets 145 degrees. It is so hot, people are dying from heat wave. Kids are dying from heat waves. And that's just from the desert part of my country. It has multiple topographies. Where I'm from, the ice is melting massively. So what that means is our livestock, our sheep, our goats are dying because it's too hot. It's too hot, and you can't constantly shave them. So we don't have mountain goats anymore in mass parts of the area that I'm from. We depend a lot on this kind of mud to build our homes, and it stays put together because the cold keeps it together. You need that temperature. It is getting so hot that our houses are collapsing, and people are left. My family no longer resides there. Both sides of my family, both grandparents are dead, and my aunts and uncles have moved away because it is physically impossible to live there anymore. So that's what's happening in Pakistan, and that's kind of why I'm involved in the climate crisis. It hits very, very close to home.
So are they educating in terms of, are there plans by Pakistan or government to educate young people or trying to mainstream climate education throughout
I think
the
that's
structures?
a very Western way to put that. The reason I say that is because people know that there's something wrong. Like I said before, it's not like you can't go into a community where you don't have water, like your water's polluted, it is so hot, your animals are dying, and be like, do you guys know about climate change? Do you know what's happening? Of course they do. They have evidence. They can tell you and show you climate change is affecting them. The way you I guess education is perhaps bridging the link between the way that we in the global north articulate it and the people who are experiencing it have their stories to share. I think that would be appropriate linking in the education. But I think it's kind of a weird question to go to them and be like, there's a climate crisis happening. And then when they ask you why, the answer is fossil fuels. And most nomadic communities are not producing fossil fuels. They're being hurt by fossil fuels.
Okay, so before you came in, I'm just giving you the last question.
Yeah, sure.
We were trying to discuss what we can do because we have seen governments have failed in terms of the commitments. There's even nothing in the text like John before you came in was telling us.
Yeah.
Youth have a declaration they're trying to put together for countries. Maybe if they failed to do something, so youth have a plan in terms of how countries can come and maybe commit to something, but also invest in it because we need the funding to make sure climate literacy is real. It's happening because the local communities could be they know it's happening. But now, we don't want to leave them behind. We want to move with everyone in terms of education, in terms of how we know it, in terms of the same language.
Yeah.
So we're asking what can be done
At the international level.
at the international level, but also in your country.
In my country.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a very simple answer for the international level. This is what my group does, and this is Polluters Out, and it's a demand. The United Nations, the UNFCCC, the countries that make up the UN, need to sign a conflict of interest policy with fossil fuel. I think it is absolutely ridiculous that this conference is being sponsored by the same people who are causing the crisis. I think it's ridiculous that when I'm walking around these panels, half of the countries, their sponsors are Unilever and Iberdrola and Scottish Power and Nestle and Microsoft. How can you talk about solving the climate crisis when you're colluding with the people causing the climate crisis? And this goes to every single nation here because Pakistan is right there. And they have had panels for the past 5 days and they have sponsors. And in the back, you can see the polluting companies sponsoring the talks. So my simple demand at the international level, and it's not a pipe dream, it has happened in the past. The precedent was set by the World Health Organization when they banned big tobacco from the World Health conferences. And what that did was that it put taxes on tobacco, it put warning labels on cigarettes, and it changed our culture of how we see the product, and that's just tobacco. Fossil fuel is killing us all. We're all screwed when temperatures get really high. So, and then in terms of my community, I know my president at the current time is talking a lot about planting trees, and that's a pitch he's selling to the rest of the world too. We're planting lots of trees, millions of trees. Amazing, guy. Like, that's thumbs up for that. Meanwhile, they're still allowing Canadian and Australian dams to be built. They're still allowing Canadian and Australian coal mines to be built, and they're taking money from them. So as much as I want to put pressure on the international level, I also want to put pressure on my government, who is hurting its own people for the sake of capital.
Okay, we shall go back to the audience. If you have any more questions, or if you want to... Oh, Alexandra wants to share something, then we shall come back to you. Thank you.
So when a lot of people on this panel are working on getting climate education mandatory from the government level. And so when we're talking about the causes of the climate crisis, do you think that we should be calling out the governments who are the ones who are, and not the governments, calling out the companies and the businesses who are the ones who created this problem? Do you think that that should be in the curriculums?
Yes, I've reached to the point where I'm not even afraid anymore. So India saying that 2070 is when they're going to reduce their carbon emissions is absolutely pathetic. I think the United States focusing on methane reductions while there are people sitting in front of the White House on a hunger strike demanding more money be put into the Build Back Better plan, and our president is here parading around methane reductions is ridiculous. I think Australia doing the same thing while killing its own indigenous peoples and then talking about how much they are wonderfully trying to create solar panels and green and like reduce plastic is also mind-boggling to me. And then the other thing, and I know this is dangerous to say, but I'm not going to have this opportunity again. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, all of these wealthy Gulf countries also having panels and sponsors up there while actively causing the people in Yemen to starve and actively preventing water from getting there and actively causing mass death, which is related to the climate crisis, but pitching that they're going to try to create green energy in their own corporations which produce fossil fuels is ridiculous. So yes, we need to name and shame because these polluters have names and addresses, and if we keep being ambiguous, they get away with also being ambiguous.
Okay, there was a question there. Please, if you could, yeah.
Hello. Okay. I want to recall the question from my comrade here to add something to the answer, because you mentioned that the government doesn't act on climate education because there are more important things on their agenda. I think there's nothing more important, because if people is dying for starvation, it's because climate change is depleting the resources. If people doesn't have water, it's because climate change is also doing that. So I think climate change permeates in all the crises that we have now, and if the government doesn't understand that, and other people from our generation doesn't understand that either, we have to use the power we have for the connections of our friends, of the social networks, to let people know and realize about this, bring more people into the discussion, that everyone knows about it, and everyone urge the politicians and the people in the power now to act responsibly. And sometimes we spend a lot of energy trying to convince politicians to act honestly. It's not that they're stupid, it's just that they don't want to do it because they have political and economic interests. So maybe we can, I don't know, use those energies to prepare for the next election, so people is really knowing for whom to vote, who is going to be allowed to be in the power, and it has to be people that really has the climate agenda on their head and that really has the good intentions and the knowledge that we are going to be checking them what they are doing and that we are not going to just let them escape as if nothing is happening.
Oh, wow. There was another question this side. I want to lose it. Okay, you can come in.
So can I just to respond, quick response. In some countries like Lebanon, climate change isn't the most pressing issue because they have no government. So like in other situations, it's different. So climate change might not be number one, and not all their problems might be caused by climate change in some countries. And a question, sorry, we didn't get your name.
Aisha.
Aisha, do you not believe that people who have caused climate change, who have caused emissions, who have caused some problems, first of all, you mentioned that the wealthy Gulf nations who are causing like people to starve in Yemen and not having access to water. Like, first of all, it's not all Gulf nations, wealthy Gulf nations that are doing that. And second of all, there are a lot of wealthy Gulf nations who use the wealth they've accumulated from fossil fuels to actually produce green energy. Like in the booth over there, if you visit Qatar, they're actually building power plants. They're building hydrogen. They're actually actively lowering the money and their income from fossil fuels and diversifying into other sectors. And do you not think by like shaming them, saying why are they here, is counterproductive, because they're coming here to express their ideas and getting new ideas and getting support from other people to produce more green energy and make the environment around in their country and around the world better. So do you not think that shaming them for their participation in these events is actually, like I said, the opposite of what we're trying to do, because they're involved in negotiations and they're pro reduction of fossil fuels and pro things that's saving the environment, and they're also locally doing several projects to help the environment. So do you not think that their efforts are enough?
Okay, we can have, I think the question was to Aisha. Yes.
So just to recap, the question was, do you not think that they're doing enough, or was it, like, what was the question? Yeah. 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 Well, I'm not promoting climate change. Climate change is bad. Like, just to clarify. But let's step back for a second. How many COPs have occurred since we're here?
This is the 26th.
26, okay, just clarify. Most people don't know this. They're not here just lobbying with their ads stuck on the walls. They're making edits, line edits to the Paris Climate Agreement. They've changed. Do you know the word fossil fuels is not even inside the Paris Climate Agreement? So these companies that are trying to be green are actively preventing progress. They're lying. And it's not just communication. Do you know how many millions of dollars were spent to host this conference? Do you know how many of them came from fossil fuel companies? If you have the villain writing the end of the story, how will we have a good ending? It's like saying the person who stabbed you in the back should be the surgeon for your pain. So I think, and this is my opinion, and you can disagree with this, but if Qatar and Lebanon and the Gulf countries really, really wanted to transition into green energy, they would have done it 26 years ago because they had the evidence. It's like, it's a case that they keep pushing and pushing because there's money in fossil fuels. And also, I agree with the question that was asked here. They're not incompetent. World leaders aren't incompetent. They know. The thing is, we're reaching our threshold, and we're reaching our threshold of how much we can take out. And so they want to take out as much as they can, as soon as they can, before governments start putting limits on them. So I think now is a time where we need naming and shaming. It's necessary. We have less than 6 years before we reach 1.5 degrees. And what that means is 40 to 160 million people will die. That's 160 million dead bodies. That is more important than any amount of oil you can extract. because that's life. Those are families, those are people. And we keep forgetting that. And that's why I think I'm not doing the opposite by naming and shaming. I'm acting like this is an emergency. And I think we all, governments included, need to get on that same page, because how will you deal with those dead bodies when they're on your land? What will you do then? No amount of policy can stop rising tides. No amount of policy can stop typhoons. No amount of policy can stop hurricanes. You can't do anything by then. We are powerless against nature, and we keep pushing it.
Wow, those are really, I don't know. I'll just go to Johnny. So the question I will pose to you, and then we come back here, is what's the way forward? Where do we go from here? Now that we have all these ideas, we know what's happening, we have the status. What's the way forward onto this? Like, what's the way forward after this kind of conversation? Because now we have had the status of climate education, we have had the solutions. So what do we do after when you leave this discussion?
So personally,
Yeah.
Okay, I'll be honest with you. When I come back to Poland, I'll study 2 exams so that I can get to university and study environmental engineering, because I don't believe those people will do something about it, so I want to do something about it. That's what I will do.
Yes, Alexandria? Way forward?
I think that there's that's like a loaded question if you have a whole bunch of things you want to do.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the main things is Earth Uprising is going to be getting our curriculum out, and we're going to continue to educate people in any capacity we can so that we can bring them into this movement, because there's still so many people that we need to bring in. And specifically, one thing that I'm also working on and while I'm here is talking about children's rights. So I'm a part of the Children versus Climate Crisis petition, where myself, Greta Thunberg, and 13 other children filed a complaint to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, stating that Argentina, Brazil, Germany, Turkey, and France were violating our rights by their inaction on the climate crisis. And so the reason why it's those 5 countries is because they ratified the rights of the child, but they also ratified the 6th protocol, which basically means that we could hold them accountable if they don't uphold their commitments. And so that's exactly what we're doing. And we filed this in 2019, and we waited over 2 years to get a response. And then finally, 2 weeks ago, they responded, and they said that our complaint was inadmissible, and it wasn't going to be going any further. And so that basically set a precedent that they do not care about children's rights. And now we're going to have to continue pushing and holding them accountable to make sure that we get them to reconsider, and also make sure that we continue to hold them accountable, because right now children's rights are being violated all around the world because of the climate crisis. So that's one thing that I'm also working on.
Yeah, Spina as well.
Johnny, I'm going to one-up you. I have 4 exams to sit when I get back to Qatar, and that is so that I can then take part and ensure that my actions will be much better than those of the people currently in charge. But the issue is that by the time I'm in a position of power, it will be too late. So as well as going back and studying, I'm going to be ensuring that the people around me are educated. As Alexandra mentioned, peer-to-peer education is key in Qatar as well. And I'm going to be ensuring that with a group of peers, we will be writing the educational curricula that we want to see in our community. So the action that we take now as youth might not be enough, and so we need to go above and beyond.
Aisha?
Yeah, mine is just to tell the truth. Yeah, that's my role, and I think that's what I'm going to keep doing until I am stopped.
Let's get one last round from the audience. If you have any question, anything you want to, add on, you can also give your submission. Like, this is an open discussion. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Bian E. Harris. I'm from Liberia. I'm part of the Liberian delegation. But I'm also a founder and executive director for the Center for Youth Civic Leadership and Environmental Studies. The issue of climate education is quite important. In my country, where I come from, and I want to just dash a little bit into the moderator when he was talking about in our country, in Africa, you have bulk of our people are uneducated and never been to school. So when I listened to Aisha, she spoke about there are signs in the community that the community people can see and they know that it has to do with climate change. But the issue is seeing the impact and not knowing what is causing it are two different things. So there where the issue of climate education comes in. So over the period, like my country, the issue of climate change is a new phenomenon, with the exception of the Environmental Protection Agency, which is a government entity. A lot of the people in my country are unaware about what is impacting their community. They don't know whether it's climate change. Some of them will maybe think about maybe it's a deity stuff or it's maybe a curse or something.
Is it God?
Yeah, it's God or something like that. So there where we have to step in. And quite recently, in June of this year, I thought it wise from my institution standpoint to bring young people together to have a platform where we can now start to engage policymakers, because even our leaders, our legislators, or people in our parliament, some of them are not educated about the issue of climate change. They don't know anything about the issue of climate change. And so when they are passing budget, they don't put in a lot of money to be able to handle this kind of a crisis. I've volunteered in a community along the coastline, a slum community, where there were a lot of projects. One of the biggest slum communities in my country called West Point. If you go to that community, you'll find out that thousands of people have lost their homes to sea erosion as a result of sea level rise. So, but they don't know that it is the effect of climate change. So we have to educate them, but in a different way. In your country, you may develop a curriculum. In my country, I can develop a curriculum for people who do not know how to read and write. I have to go to them and talk to them and speak to them in their languages so that they are able to understand. And so this is my first COP, and I've learned a lot from a lot of young people. I attended the Conference of Youth also, and I listened to the arguments, to the advocacies from a lot of young people, and it helped me a lot. So when I get back to my country, I'm just going to step up my game, work with a lot of other young people, and continue to engage our different communities, because it's actually something that needs to be handled. Like for Liberia, we control 45% of the Upper Guinea forest. And the indigenous that live in those forests survive on the forest. They cut the forest down for their sustainability, for fuel, to power their homes and all that. Now, you talk about the green economy. What can we do as young people to see how we can find alternative livelihood sources for these people around there to be able to maintain the forest? Because when this forest is standing, we stand to benefit a lot. When the forest is gone, we tend to lose a lot. So these are things that, for me and other young people back home, we're going to start to engage when we get back. So I'm very happy to listen to all of you, and there are a lot I'm able to learn from you guys. And these are things that we're going to take back home to our own country to see how we can help solve the issue of the climate crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Another question. This is the opportunity, guys, you have. Ask anything. If you want to know anything about organizing to make sure we have climate literacy really mandatory, it's also something you can ask. How do they do it? Yes, there is a question.
I came in kind of late, but I just wanted to thank all of you for being honest. Can you hear me? Okay, I got like nods and shakes, but I'm 16. I'm from Northern California. I'm indigenous Yurok from Northern California, and also from Aotearoa or New Zealand. And I want to thank you for your honesty, because I show up to these panels and it's like plugs for random nonprofits. It's a lot of people talking, like beating around the bush, talking about things, and I'm like, we need to be direct. I'm so sick of these people not being honest. Sorry. So thank you for your honesty. And I admire everybody's organizing skills. I just wanted to know, as a youth, COP is like such a exhaustive space, just like I expressed. And I just wanted to know, like, what keeps you motivated in this space? I know for me, it's like watching panels like these where it's people who are talking about issues that I care about and talking about them honestly and calling out the companies that are exploiting us. And I just want to know, like, what helps you in these spaces where, like, I'm literally surrounded by adults and you're the only 16-year-old I know that is, like, in this room right now. You know what I mean? Thank you. Sorry.
Actually, that was my last question. Among the questions, I wanted to ask all of them what keeps them motivated, and I think we shall do this as the last round, as you're giving your last remarks. I think we shall start with Johnny. There's a question: what keeps you motivated? But also, if you can give your closing remarks.
All right, what keeps me motivated, like the most, are like, if I were to do this alone, I think I wouldn't be motivated. So what gives me motivations are the other people who do it, who share the aim, and I also feel motivated because, especially from what I could hear from you today, I feel that we are gonna be a better generation than the generation which is now in power. And I really feel motivated by this, that if we strive every day for a better world, something may come out of it. So our fight is just, not for vain. And what particularly motivates me as a leader of a small team is when I hope when I come after this cup, and when maybe something, even a little law about climate education is gonna be passed, we will see. That would be a small success for my team, and that always motivates me. If my team, as a team, if we have success, even how small or how big it is. Yep.
Okay, Alexandria.
Yeah, I think what keeps me motivated is like these people right here and all of the people I've been able to see after such a long time, because there's so many people I know online that I've connected with and I've organized with, and I get to finally meet them in person here. And I think that community is what keeps me motivated. And then kind of for my closing remarks, since Aisha has pulled out all the stops here, I guess I'll also say that I also think that after this COP, there's going to have to be so much work that needs to be done, because as you probably tell that this COP has been a complete mess, in the fact that there's not as many communities represented here, and there's so many people who have been left out of the conversation, and there's not as much access and inclusivity as there has to be when there's conferences that are this important. And so I think after this COP, there's going to be a lot more organizing. And I think after every COP, there's always a wave of people who get involved, because there's so many people who are always so upset and angry by the inaction. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of action that happens after this COP, not from governments, but from activists and from civil society.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think apart from the wonderful people who sit near me, who have done so much and show me that there's so much more than can be done, it's the people back at home who don't have the chance to be here. And so I'm motivated by them because I know that I'm here representing them, their ideas, and their action. And so I see that if I'm not here, our voices they're not heard. But beyond that, it's everyone in the audiences for all of the panels that I've been in. And whenever it comes to question time there, I always learn so much about different communities. Coming from a privileged background, that's not something that I'm exposed to. And so I learn from everyone who shares that experiences. And that's something that motivates me to keep going and go further.
Aisha.
Yeah, so I wanted to actually answer what you said and then motivation. I think you're so absolutely right that we need to bring the vocabulary we associate with sea level rising and climate change and global warming to the communities who are experiencing, in a way that it's like an exchange, and in a way that it's no longer attributed to like random things, but they know that there are people behind this that are causing them to suffer, and not just people, but companies and corporations. Because my family, I resonate with that. My grandparents both died, and I lost cousins to water pollution because our water is so toxic. And nobody in my community for a long time had the vocabulary to even articulate who was causing it, but because our just water was constantly polluted. So it was just a matter of fact, and they accepted it. So, like, having these discussions is absolutely vital, but in a manner that is both respectful and also bridges, as opposed to imports knowledge or forces it upon communities. What motivates me? I think I have a dual answer to that. Pain. A lot of my fellow youth and also a lot of the people who have witnessed the effects of climate damage are in pain. And it is existential. We can feel it in our bodies that the earth is suffering. I can feel it in my throat when I'm here talking to you in these panels. And for the people who carry mass amount of their dead with them, there's a lot of pain. But at the same time, love. If we think about extinction, there is so much at stake. So much that we love is at stake. Like from your favorite brand of candy to your family, to the memories that make you you, like your entire family's history is at stake. Mankind, every creation that we've created, who will be there to lament us when we're gone? So extreme, extreme love for humanity, which is kind of naive and it's irrational at times, is what motivates me, because I cannot allow myself to imagine otherwise.
All right, thank you. I will say this. It is time for governments to show leadership by agreeing to ambitious plans that will equip primary and secondary students everywhere with knowledge and skills they need in a rapidly changing environment. In doing so, a new generation will be able to make the best and most environmentally informed choices on the way they live, work and participate in government while providing a climate literate workforce needed to build new, strong and sustainable economy that is vital in the 21st century. In doing so, leaders can help ensure that the first generation of truly climate literate and civically active citizens will be able to hold governments, states, regions, cities, businesses accountable for their actions, meaning they are denying us that. I want to urge governments at COP26 to deliver an outcome at least that gives climate literacy the same importance as any other key subject, by strengthening the aims and ambitions and aspirations of the Action for Climate Empowerment, Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, because this is something that you committed to. So we hope you can do this. And also we request you to make climate education compulsory, at least assessed and linked to civic engagement. So I want to thank the panelists. If you could give them a very round of applause. They've really been so inspiring. It has been a very good session. I've personally been touched, and I look forward to seeing you at so many other events that we have here. Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone.